I have the opportunity to record a conversation with my good friend, Rob Ricciardelli. Rob is many things. Regional Director of Business Development for Escalon, founder of Converging Zone, your nonprofit, and probably the most networked person that I know. I mean, that's debatable, but you're up there, definitely top three.
Yes.
So, Rob, thanks for joining me and looking forward to the conversation.
Well, it's great to be here. Of course, I've had relationship with OneAccord and yourself now for some time, and it's quite a pleasure to be here.
I think you are probably the person with the longest standing relationship with OneAccord that I've had the opportunity to interview. So it'll be good to get some insights as we go along in this interview of how what you do plays really well with what we do.
Absolutely.
And on that, I want to just jump in. Would you talk a little bit starting just on Escalon?
Yes. Yeah, Escalon is a company that's been around for over 20 years. Most of the growth has been organic, although we picked up a few companies that people in the Northwest are familiar with, especially Early Growth and Full Stack Finance out of Los Angeles. And those are similar outsourced companies with different parts that we acquired, bringing us to over 5,000 clients in what we do. And we specialize in full stack finance and HR for our clients, including integrated tax team and over 70 CFOs that all have fundraising experience. I would like to make that clear because there's other CFO organizations that don't have that experience that early stage companies really need.
Yeah. And target or ideal customer profile. So just to set the stage, so where you're speaking from is dealing with what size company?
Yeah, generally we're dealing with companies from founder, we're just one founder, to usually typically under 50 employees. In some cases, we have a larger client coming to us and saying, we just lost our CFO, we just lost our VP of finance or accountant, and we need to insert folks in there, outsource folks to serve that account till they can hire. Oftentimes, it's going so well, they don't end up hiring. They just utilize their outsource.
Yeah. One of the things we were talking about before we started rolling the cameras was just who you are as a person really brings a lot to the role. And so for those that don't know Rob's been in the area for a long time and engaged in a lot of different business organizations as well as nonprofits. And we were talking about people and purpose and the power of relationships. So again, setting the stage, I have some questions. I'm gonna get to them, and they're more specific to your role with Escalon, but just setting the stage so that people know where you're coming from. Your personal philosophy around relationship and networking and not forcing agendas.
That's great. I like the idea of, I've been in sales for most of my career. They call it sales. I call it serving. And so oftentimes I tell people I'm selling nothing, but I'm serving a lot of different areas. And I think relationships sometimes can be intermixed with agendas. And so the agenda can be so thick that there's this false idea of relationship. But then when the agenda ends, you see where the relationships are. And I was just sharing with you earlier that a friend and I talked about this morning, that to me, it's all about relationships. Any exchange is about relationships because that's where trust begins. And trust, the speed of trust is the speed of opportunity in that relationship. And then from that relationship can come a number of things. One is you earn trust, you learn about each other, and you can offer maybe other connections that might fit an opportunity for that person you've just met, something they need in their life. And the other piece of it is some other agenda that might fit what you might be doing in your business. And if that's a fit, then there's an agenda that can begin. But it all begins with relationship, because at the end of the day, the agenda will come and go. But the relationship, if it's a real relationship based on trust and caring for the other person, those don't end. They shouldn't end. And so that way you can have an agenda and it goes wrong or it doesn't go well, but the relationship continues on. To me, those are the best engagements to ever pursue.
So, Rob, with your focus on relationship, can you share a specific success story where your network actually played a pivotal role in driving either revenue growth or success for the business you were with?
Yeah, one recent one that has come up is because I network very well with attorneys, with venture capital folks, bankers, that kind of thing. Oftentimes, those are things that I'm not personally going to benefit from other than the excitement and joy of making a good connection, which is my greatest passion. Well, in this case, the person wanted our services, couldn't afford our services, but I knew that wasn't their greatest need right now. Their greatest need was for their business to continue. They needed the right capital influx into their business. And I was able to introduce through my network a venture capital organization through an individual that gave them an influx of capital of $300,000, which may not seem like a lot, but it basically saved the company. They're going well enough to now can see the need for us in the next few months as they begin to hire and bring on more folks. So that's an example of utilizing a network that has really not a big tie to me. It could come back to me, and that's an example of it.
Yeah. And with that, that's a great segue to talk about what types of companies do need you and the services that you provide.
Everybody. Everybody needs me. No, really, we're agnostic as far as who we work with, the verticals we work with. We're agnostics to systems because our accounting team can work in Sage and QuickBooks Online, of course, the number one accounting system we use, NetSuite and several others, Xero. And then on the HR side, we work well with PEOs like Insperity, TriNet, and other PEOs, which are HR companies. We can insert ourselves, especially in bringing in a bookkeeper that can interface with those HR companies. And on the other hand, we do have an HR outsource as well, if a PEO is not a good fit for them. So those are some of the areas that we can help them. And again, every sector, probably 80% of our clients are venture-backed. In some tech space or life sciences, but we have a AI practice, a crypto practice, professional services, and we call it Main Street, which is brick and mortar, coffee shop, or some other company that isn't venture backed. We can support them as well.
What are the some examples of benefits that you're able to bring to these companies? People buy benefits, not features, right?
Right. Well, one of the benefits of working with an outsourced, a fractional outsourced organization such as ourselves is, number one, a lot of times you can't hire the right person. Finding the right person is not easy. And you got to find the right person, the right expertise for that position. Then you've got to look at benefits and other costs related to hiring and payroll taxes and all those things. By outsourcing, you don't have to worry about any of those. You're getting expertise that you need right now, and oftentimes your investment organizations like VCs or private investors, private equity, angel investors, they prefer that because you're getting what you need right now to get the company off the ground at the lowest possible cost available with the expertise you need. And that's one of the advantages of working with outsourced services such as we provide.
As technology advances and we start to play with AI more and people have chatbots answering their emails, how do you continue to differentiate and continue to build real relationship in today's technology-driven world?
Yeah, I think right now is a time where there's some fear going on with AI. I like to look back at history. Whenever something new would come along, we always had this fear of robots and other things taking over, and it's never happened. I still don't think it's going to happen with AI or any of these new technologies. I think they still need people. They need people to operate them, and people really want to connect with people. Right now, after COVID and everything else that's happened, there's still such a need for real connections. This eyeball to eyeball stuff versus even the second best thing is the virtual calls that we have, which are wonderful. But the handshake, the hug, the real personal interaction, people are still starving for it. So there's always going to be a need for that. I love technology, and I have been able to expand my reach through technology, starting with emails. Years ago, I had 150,000 people on my email list.
Wow.
Because there was no blogs, there was no websites, things like that. And so I communicated to 70 different countries through my email list, which brought me invites to 17 different countries that I got to visit and speak to and meet incredible folks that are still my friends today. So technology will always be a good thing if it's held the right way, but it'll never replace real tangible relationships. But you can utilize them through social media, places like LinkedIn and other technologies that are coming out, and leverage those with the idea of real relationships.
Yeah, and isn't that somewhat what your nonprofit centers around? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, a lot of when I started my nonprofit years ago, I was Visionary Advancement Strategies, and we moved it more to Converging Zone because of my passion for converging people, diverse people coming together. And that was the beginning of how I expanded my reach globally and was able to go and meet these wonderful folks and help with their businesses. It was based on a nonprofit. So I've kept the nonprofit around. I haven't done a lot with it, but you're hearing it today. You're going to hear about Converging Zone and some of the things we're going to be doing here in the near future to bring people together.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Let's back up a little bit. So before your time with Escalon, you've been a sales professional for the majority of your career.
Yes.
What got you into sales?
You know, it's interesting. I think my older brother, 7 years older, my older brother Mike, was in sales right out of college, Central Washington University. So, and I was selling stuff since I was a kid. So I was selling newspapers. I won trips for selling more and more households on my newspaper route, knocking on doors. Went from there to selling candy door to door. You know, actually had an adult drive me and a few friends around to sell candies in other neighborhoods, which you don't hear that happening too much with 10, 11-year-olds these days. But yeah, so I've always felt this idea of finding something good that I can offer somebody. I never was shy about it. Rejections, like sorry, no thanks, or whatever, didn't bother me. I never took it personally. So I felt a natural inclination into sales and went that direction actually during college and after college.
Okay. So there's a question. We may or may not use this. We'll see. What's your favorite story about OneAccord? Because you've been around us for a long time. So I know we're kind of taking the spotlight off of you, but I'm curious because maybe it's one that I haven't heard before.
Yeah, I would think, OneAccord, I think, comes down to the heart of the founder. It began with the heart of the founder, Jeff Rogers, who I love very, very much. And Jeff is one of those guys that reminds me of me in a lot of ways. He's a lot smarter than I am. He wouldn't say that, but he is, and he just has a lot of strategic areas that he's been able to serve in. But what's really good about Jeff, like me, is he realizes, as smart as he is, he's one person, and to really impact the businesses and the folks he wants to serve around the planet, he needed good people around him. So he's been able over the years to gather some good people around him. And what's interesting about Jeff is you don't always, when you're going after collecting really good people around you who you hope are going to build those relationships with you and with others, You don't know that until it's put to a test and the agenda shifts. If the agenda shifts, oftentimes those people are no longer want to be a part of it. And so sometimes through the years, they had to pivot the business, OneAccord, in great ways, in ways that advance how they can serve. And some people just didn't feel they could make that shift. And a lot of times there were some relationships that were based on agendas. Jeff is not that way. He loves to build with teams that are relationship centric, but have the expertise to serve the client at their point of need. So I've seen that from the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. So going back to the services that you're providing right now, and we talked a little bit about the nonprofit, but I actually don't know that did we talk about what the nonprofit will be doing, or do you want to save that for when you do your launch?
I can give you generally what it'll be doing. It'll be doing a lot of what I'm doing now in the sense of sharing people that are making a difference in communities around the world, sharing what they're doing so people can. They may not have had a platform, but now they have a voice in a certain area that they didn't have before. The other piece, the biggest piece, is really getting people together. We have our churches, but they're really kind of exclusive to that idea of faith or that idea of religion, where Converging Zone really is about opening up a safe place for quite diverse people. So whatever their faith is, or religion or non-religion, it doesn't matter. They're still going to be valued in these gatherings that I'm going to put together. So that's one thing. And then we're going to have coaching elements, masterminds, and other things to bring those same principles of safety and relationship into those opportunities. Then we're going to have ambassadors in other communities around the country, around the world, that will want to do this in their community. And the idea is these ambassadors are going to be wired a little bit like me and Jeff Rogers and like you, which is relationships are number one. And then understanding if you're an ambassador and a connector in your community, you know the wealth in your community. There's people that people need to learn from or can learn from that don't have opportunity to share. We've heard of TED Talks that give 18, 20 minutes of brilliance that can open up conversation. So each of these meetings that I'm going to be putting together, we're going to have somebody share 18 to 20 minutes of their brilliance. Not a long time, but enough to open up conversation around it. But the rest of it will be just hanging out with people. So still finding the right venue, finding the right context for those venues, and the time will be one of the things we do. But that's the main purposes of the Converging Zone, and also just open up the idea of a safe place for people to be.
That's great. Would you talk a little bit about going back to sales background? So we got the upbringing story and kind of what led you into sales. At what point did you realize, okay, this is what I'm going to do?
You mean as far as the sales?
Yeah, for a career.
Yeah, I think the way I realized it was that I was received immediately whenever I sold things, because I always went into it with thinking of the other, not what I get out of it. I had that as a young kid. I had this compassion for others, and I think it came across. And so when I talk about rejection, I very rarely got rejected. It may not be something they needed at the time, but you could tell they were happy that I was there. I was the one making the offering. So I felt like people trusted me early on, even as a young guy, and I felt like I was in God's, if you wanted to call it God's purpose or God's design. I was designed to do these things. And when you feel that you're living in your design, you feel like you're on the right track.
You do genuinely have that, and you can sense it. If you guys get to spend time with Rob, you sense it from you that you really are all about the other person. So with that, I have a question. What was the most challenging sales role that you had?
I'm not going to mention the company, but the type of sales that was the most challenging for me was the lack of building relationship. It was mostly tech driven. It was mostly just throwing out a bunch of emails or connecting with folks out there, it all seemed kind of pitchy to me, and I didn't like it. It was not a good fit for me. Thankfully, I wasn't there in that position very long, and I knew that didn't bring joy to me. Didn't feel like it was the way I was designed to reach people, and therefore, the tech-driven, sending a bunch of emails out and hoping you get a few that'll call back. That's just not how I'm wired.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in your role now, I've watched as you've done some collaborations with other firms, some collaborations with, I was at an event that you co-hosted or at least helped promote, the AI event that we were at together. With that, what difference does it make when you're enabled to act relationally and you're able to bring those collaborations together? What do you see from that? What comes out of those collaborations?
Yeah, I think again, it's a big extension of what drives me, and that is, I get to introduce my friends. I get to introduce people like you, being at the event, because we have a relationship. I can introduce you with not only confidence but with joy, because I know who you are and I know what you do and what value you bring. So the same thing happens with the partners of my events. We've done a few events recently, founders and funders. Jeff just went to one where we bring founders and funders together, and having, in that case, we had J.P. Morgan and we had Bernstein Wealth as partners, and we all brought certain people to come in and join in, and we intermixed the wealth that we have together, which is the relationships we have.
Yeah.
So we got to meet some new friends in that exchange.
Yeah, that's awesome. With that, and I think it's a great way for you to be staying in touch with those people that aren't ready yet, right? And so I'm going to go back to picking on your decades of sales background here. What are you watching right now in terms of trends in your industry, and how are you staying in touch with those folks that weren't ready yet as you watch these trends develop?
I keep up with it with an organization called Fractionals United that's really grown in the last few years, 3,600 members, and we keep up with the trends, and we actually refer one another through that opportunity. Also, going back to clients that may not have been ready for me, I try to touch base with them at least once or twice a year. Ideally, it'd be nice per quarter, but sometimes that's a little too much for some. But that way they know that I'm still thinking of them, I'm cheering them on, and hopefully one day they might need some of our services.
Yeah. Yeah. And your sales methodology has developed over several significant periods, what I would call business landscapes, right? So because you go back 20, 30 years in the sales profession
or more.
But, you talk about having an email list of 150,000 people. I have 15,000 in my database. So you had 10 times that many that you were staying in touch with via email. But I find in other businesses that sometimes there's too much of a heavy emphasis on the email outreach and not enough emphasis on the in-person meetings, or sometimes it's the other way around. You have too many in-person meetings and you don't really provide a lot in by way of follow-up. So there's these significant gaps between touches. So one of the things I think you do really well is pulling from all of these different methodologies that have been used over different business landscapes. So give an idea, what could somebody expect if they come ask a question of you and they're inquiring about Escalon services? What do they expect to get?
Yeah, I think the discovery call, I like the idea of a discovery call, because we're discovering each other. I'm discovering about them and their business and their needs, and they're discovering about what we might offer. But oftentimes you find in there, I recently had a call with someone that called for some stuff that they might be able to work with us on, and the call went a whole different direction. Now we're actually becoming friends, and I'm helping them in some other areas. Has nothing to do with the context of what we do as Escalon. So it depends on the call, but normally those discovery calls identify certain things that they're doing that I either have a direct way of serving them or bringing a solution to, or I pull a resource out or a company like OneAccord that can provide the services that we don't provide for them.
Yeah.
So that's where I leverage my network.
Yeah, kind of ecosystem approach, which I'm a huge fan of. You have an incredible team at Escalon of service providers. How do you stay in touch with folks after you've connected them to the right resource, or how does that journey look after handoff?
That's a great question. I try to be involved early on as much as I can, but once we hand them off to our onboarding team, I have to have confidence that our onboarding team is doing a great job. And from there, in most cases, they're going to have a CFO that leads the team or a controller. And then I'm in touch with that controller and that CFO, making sure things are going, progressing the way they should. And then probably within that first month, I'm in touch with them a few times.
Yeah.
And then the next month, maybe one time. Always available if they need me more, but try to let the team do what they do best, and then let them know I'm still available if they need something beyond that.
Yeah. Put me in the seat of I'm a business owner, and I have a sub $10 million company, but I'm handling all of my own accounting. I'm doing all the HR for my company, and I come to you and I say, Rob, this is overwhelming for me. I don't. There's too much on my plate. How do you answer that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, of course, it's overwhelming. How's it working for you? It's not working very well. So yeah, because if we can take those responsibilities off your hands, you can be more productive in the things you need to be productive in, getting the word out and maybe doing some revenue. Working on revenue opportunities. So what we typically do is find out where you're at, what you might need, and then we'll get some scoping information from you. Whether we'll have you sign an NDA to protect you, but also we'll have our chief CPA accountant go in, have access, temporary read access, look at your transactions, and we base the cost on transactions. So a small company doesn't have a lot of transactions, especially accounts receivable. Mm-hmm. So the costs will be minimal. Same thing with HR. It's all based on employee count and a small fee per employee to handle the HR and payroll parts of it. So, yeah, we just basically scope it out, and within 24 to 48 hours, I have a quote for the client, and within 2 weeks, we're onboarded and ready to go.
Okay. What's the average length of engagement? You mentioned earlier that sometimes people are so happy they just kind of stay. So,
yeah, it's a good question. So I think the average company stays with us 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
But typically a company will stay with us and full stack on the finance side until they get to Series B. Mm-hmm. By then they can hire a CFO or a VP of finance type. Up until then, we do typically the full stack, do their taxes, everything. Then after that, it's supplemental. What I heard from one client, actually a couple clients the last few months, is they said, Rob, we were with you till Series B and beyond because your tax team is incredible. We still do our taxes through you guys. So even though they built their own accounting teams, they still do their taxes through us.
What is the growth trajectory for most of those clients? I mean, Series B, is pretty significant. So
yeah. So it's all over the board as far as the financial picture. But typically, when they're Series B, they're looking at 100 million plus revenue. Mm-hmm. So that's typically that. And I think from a timeline perspective, today's things are very tight. Banking's tight. We had the banking hiccup, last year, and we're still paying the price of some of that, inflation and things like that. But depending on the company, you find tech companies and certain life science companies still getting the funding. So certain companies are not having the problem. I've even seen some crypto companies get the money immediately that they need. So it's all over the board as far as the progression on how fast they grow, how fast they get the funding. But typically, Series B and beyond they're over 100 million in valuation.
Do you notice a difference when those companies are also engaged with somebody like a OneAccord that is more like a fractional operating partner, kind of holding them to a plan and a growth trajectory? Have you experienced that before, and does it make a difference?
We have banks that call us and they just got their bank account. Or we'll have international advisors or even governments like New Zealand let us know that they're coming to the U.S., they're looking for this, and that, especially getting their accounting set up, looking for an attorney, looking for basics. So a founder is an entry point, a bank account, an EIN number. We can help them from that inception. In regards to working with a company like OneAccord, looks at their operations, looks at their revenue model, looks at how they can move the needle from a revenue perspective, they're very valuable because those are areas that we don't participate in. Our CFOs will look at revenue models, our FP&A team, but they don't do the operations needed to bring those to actually happen. That includes hiring the right salespeople, having the right sales methodologies, making sure they're held to the tasks towards revenue, making sure they have a proper exit plan. We can talk about an exit plan, but you guys will take somebody to really find the heart of that founder or founders in when they need to exit, what it needs to look like when they exit, and then help them along that whole path. And there's a big difference, and both are needed.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, was around plans. How much of a difference does it make when a client comes to you and says, hey, I've already talked with a consultant, I have a strategic plan, this is my trajectory, versus just coming to you and saying, I need help, but I don't know what help I need?
Yeah, well, it's always best, obviously, if they have a plan. It's amazing how many startups don't have a plan, and so, or don't have it written down. They have a plan in their minds, but it's not written down. So trying to get them to write it down and make it plain, have a real plan ahead, it's always a better thing. And a lot of times coming to you guys first is ideal, because then they can really come to an agreement on what they need to do to go forward. We can do a lot of the accounting stuff for them, but companies like yours are the ones that are going to help them get to that next step in their development.
Yeah, planning with the end in mind.
Yeah,
somebody famous said that.
Yeah, planning with the end in mind. What's your plans? And some don't have a plan.
Well, Rob, thanks so much for doing this, answering all the questions that I had for you. Tell people real quick where they can find you.
Yeah, so my website for Converging Zone is being developed right now, but the URL will be convergingzone.com. Escalon is www.escalon.services. And my email is rob.ricciardelli@escalon.services. That's how you can reach me.
Yeah, awesome. Or reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with Rob.
Yes, yes. And I'm on most of social media, so you can find me there too.
Yeah.